Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Let's Remember Suikoden 3. We have made our way to the Brass Castle as Chris Lightfellow, commander of the Knights of Zexen. And, I would explore the space, but I actually want to move through the story fairly quickly. So we're going to get there. We'll talk about it when I get to the point, because I actually kind of know what's coming up, and I want to talk about certain things. So in the last segment, I talked very briefly about how I don't really enjoy the fantasy genre's tendency to use sort of elves or other sort of species or races as allegorical representations for certain groups in the real world. It can work in some cases. In Dragon Age cases, I think they use the Dalish fairly well. Although that's another case of using elves to sort of represent, Romani or things like that. And it works to an extent, but not perfectly. Here we have this visual shorthand that's going to occur, and you're going to see it right away because I think it's Sheba or Dupa. I actually think that's Dupa. Yes, it's Dupa. So Dupa shows up talking to Boris, and so we have this easy image in our head. Boris as this human, this, light-skinned, fair-haired human, and then sort of Dupa, the lizard grasslander, with all the bright-colored accoutrement, as opposed to the cold steel of Boris, and it provides a very simple shorthand for us understanding the differences between these two cultures, but at the same time, that shorthand is sort of necessarily and unfortunately incomplete, because what we're looking at is a human and then sort of an anthropomorphic lizard, right? And while that might help us understand the relationship between these two groups in a simple sense by providing us a general image, that we can then project meaning onto, and we can say, okay, this is, the Zexens are kind of imperialist Europe or whatever allegory we want to make, and then the Grasslanders are native people, but I mean, that's not as detailed as it could be, because particularly the lizard tribe plays up the savagery image, which sort of plays into the biases of the Zexen. And there's something interesting to be said there in the sense that that visual depiction sort of helps us understand where the biases of the Zexen knights comes from, because there's this big difference between the two peoples, but at the same time, the image that we're getting is maybe not as powerful as what we would get if, say, it was, say we replaced Dupo with a person of color, or somebody who's clearly just a native, a representation of a Native American, or South American, or an African sort of tribal image. Right, and those depictions would probably still be unfortunate in the context of JRPGs, because the images that they use tend to be exaggerated. Skies of Arcadia had exaggerated imagery, although admittedly that was in the purpose of a larger thematic point. But here, there's, I think later on, Boris sort of says, like, dumb lizard or something like that, and that's not as powerful as him not saying like a slur that we would understand in the real world, but sort of dismissing another human being as sort of dumb and savage, right? The impact of that moment is decreased because it's being literally, one group is dehumanized. They aren't human. So the effectiveness of what's going on here is questionable. It's effective in the sense that there's a broad image for people to sort of project meaning and understanding onto, but at the same time, that broadness, in this case, undercuts sort of the political and cultural commentary and deftness that the series tends to have. Even though animal characters have been a thing in this series pretty much forever, there are griffin people and kobolds And in Suikoden 5, I don't know if I mentioned it in any of the previous parts of the playthrough, maybe in Ghetto's chapter, there are beavers. There's literally like a clan of beavers. Here we'll have ducks and lizards and things like that. Yeah, this is it. I think this is when Boris sort of says like, you know, like basically like stupid lizard. I do like that you can choose the option where Chris just accepts the fact that they're coming in and making an offer for like a peace summit, and then the one who actually needs something explained is Boris in this context. So you can actually choose and have Chris ask the question or Chris accept and show a level of competency that Boris actually doesn't have. So it's this nice thing where we can assert Chris's intelligence in a dialogue choice, which places her as somebody more competent than at least one of her subordinates. So that's a nice choice to be able to make. Right, and Boris is this very brash individual. Dupa's, you know, here it is. Watch your tongue, lizard. I remember some of this. Right, and you know, that's not as effective because, you know, compared to whatever insult that can be said, you know. If it was a person, you know, he's saying, you know, watch your tongue, savage, or something like that. I don't think, you know, watch your tongue, lizard isn't as effective because he's talking to a giant lizard. And that shorthand is not as powerful because it's easy to be like, oh, okay, yeah, giant lizard, or like, here's a duck, right? Whereas here's a Grasslander, and they're a person, and they have a different visual depiction. Like if I stand Chris next to the Grasslander, it's like Chris has got white hair and pale skin, and the Grasslander has dark hair, dark skin, and that's a stronger way to approach racial politics in this game than giant ducks or giant lizards or whatever. Chris has a lot of cash. And I don't think that is carried over from chapter to chapter. I don't think that money is stuff that I earned in Ghetto's chapter. I think this is exclusive to each character. I could be wrong. We'll find out when I play as Hugo. But one thing that I think we do not pay attention to in JRPGs or other games sometimes is the economics of what's going on. This is a character that we can recruit, by the way. That's Belle. I think it's Belle. Yes. And that thing she is hammering is not just a barrel, but it actually turns into like a crazy badass robot, which is awesome. And it's not really anachronistic because the series sort of establishes that that's a thing that can exist, or at least it has in previous titles. So what was I saying? Oh, economics, right? So Chris having a lot of money. Presuming that Hugo will not have as much money when I play his chapter. Oh, I upgraded Chris's thing earlier. I did some stuff off screen, just to make sure that my characters were all set. So we'll find our way back upstairs by going up here. But the economics of particularly RPGs, it's interesting, you know, how many things do I start off with? What do I have in my inventory when I start off with? How much money do I have? Those things, ludically, for lack of a better modifier, tell us something about the characters that we're playing as, and they tend to be things that we overlook. We sort of just take for granted, you know, like this character has money, this character doesn't. But in certain games, economics are really, really important. They drive sort of how things are functioning within certain spaces in the game world. This happens outside of RPGs. An example of this would be if I'm sneaking around a level in Dishonored. How much can I steal from, you know, somebody in the slums compared to me breaking into an upper class, you know, aristocrat's place? What I can and cannot gather in those spaces, how much money I can or cannot gather in the spaces, and what are the objects that I can pick up in those spaces, tell me something about the world. I mean, obviously I can see through quick visual shorthand of like, this is a rundown shack, and this is like a really opulent space. But It's also something like, how much money can I make in the space by sort of taking objects tells me more about the space, and the items that I can find in the space tell me something about the characters that live in the space. The same thing happens in RPGs. Ghetto's unit had certain amounts of healing items and, food in their inventory because they're sort of traveling mercenaries. Here we have somebody who has a lot of money because she is head of the military. I'm operating off the assumption that the money isn't shared between characters. If it is, that would be unfortunate. I don't really remember how it works, but the point I'm making is still fairly valid, I think. So here we go. Peace Summit going on. Dupa is here on behalf of his chief, who we saw in Ghetto's chapter. Ghetto met with him. This is Lucia, or Lucia. I choose the pronunciations, so it's going to be Lucia. The same way how I said Louis is Louis and not Louis or Louise. Well, Louise would be feminine. She showed up in Suikoden 2 as a character who tried to assassinate your protagonist after you became head of sort of the liberation army that was fighting in the war. I like having characters show up in multiple games because how these people grow into different roles is interesting, and sort of what they represent is interesting too. I like that 2 of the clan leaders present at this meeting are female, because it represents a different type of power structure than what we know from Ch.1, right? Chris is sort of in this weird space where she is a powerful figure in a largely patriarchal space, and we'll see that the Grasslanders have a different approach to how things are structured, in terms of government and in terms of everything else. Right, so Chris is saying that, the council will comply with the treaty. I'm here on the behalf of the council. Whereas all of these clan members are sort of here, they are the leaders of their clan. There's no council for them to report to. They make sort of larger decisions for their clan. Beecham says, I think it's strange for a leader not to stake his life on the bargaining table. This doesn't happen in the Grasslands. But Chris says, we pledge an oath to the Ch.1 rune and to the council. In Ch.1, the roles of military and government are separate. But the Grasslanders don't understand that. How can a leader without military prowess govern and protect the nation? The way that they have to live is different than the way that the Ch.1 Confederation has to live. Salome rightly tries to get the discussion back on point. And then we have Sana, another clan leader, the Chisa clan. And we're working towards a pretty good truce. And Sana said, we thank I just blanked out, but she's thanking their gods and spirits. And Salome says, we share your sentiment, although we thank our goddess instead, right? There's not a lot of religious things, as I noted in the last chapter, but I like pointing them out. This isn't a religious struggle. This isn't some sort of holy war. It's not like this is a war of conversion against the Grasslanders or anything. This is border skirmishes and territories and things like that. But it is interesting to see when those religious differences are stressed, because it's just another compounding factor that leads to miscommunication between these people. They don't understand that both groups having some sense of spirituality and religion makes them both human, in the sense that they have things to explain the world beyond them. Instead, it's a question of, which goddess is, the one that we worship, which one is the ones that we believe in, and not just, when I look at religion in the real world, it's, first off, I should say that faith is a type of bravery that I will never have. And make no mistake, faith, I don't think we should ever perceive it as foolishness. We should perceive it as a type of bravery. I know that sounds overly fawning towards religion, but it is very, it's very not crazy, but very very audacious to have faith in things that you cannot perceive. That's my take on it. So there is something admirable about faith to a certain extent, which the characters in this space don't see that. They don't see like, okay, we both have certain commonalities. We all have religion. We have all these other things. They only see the differences. They don't see sort of the broader, bigger picture. I like having these interactions between characters because we get to see that the way that they interact with each other will contrast with the way that we perceive them when we jump to a different POV character. So the way that we see Chris and the rest of the knights interacting contrasts heavily with the way that Hugo perceives them when he encounters them, right? And that sort of difference in perception is important in explaining the lack of communication that makes the war that occurs possible, right? Here we are trying to find a middle ground, trying to find a truce, and then nope, doesn't happen. The Lizard clan is attacking us, the Karya clan is advancing, and this is when we get into the point where the different perspectives start to tell us something. We can intuit after playing Ghetto's chapter what's going on here. We know, okay, so what would make the Lizard clan angry? Oh yeah, we saw in another chapter Chris killed their chief and attacked the Great Hollow, but we also sit back, right, and we go like, wait a minute, Chris is here at the Peace Summit. What's going on? The game's not really subtle about the fact that these people are being manipulated, but the different perspectives make it very clear, because we see that certain events aren't really happening. Chris doesn't go to the Great Hollow in this chapter. So we have to ask ourselves, what the hell is going on? We saw Sarah in Ghetto's chapter, so we know that there's something else going on. We know she mentioned a man who's manipulating things. But now we get to see how those manipulations function because the perspective that Chris has is limited, right? She's not at the Great Hollow. She has no knowledge of what happened at the Great Hollow. All she sees here are the clans attacking during the Peace Summit, and the Zexan Knights wonder if this was really just a ruse to get them out into the open so they can be attacked. They don't have the benefit of all the knowledge that we have, so there's certain components of dramatic irony that occur. Not in a major sense, but it still exists. So this is how Suikoden 3 handles war in the abstract. And I don't enjoy it as much as how Suikoden 2 does. And there are reasons for that, right? We'll actually delay. No, actually, we're going to move up here so we have more units to cover sort of our retreat, because we are going to be retreating. I remember this fight a little bit. I remember Chris's chapters a little better than I remember everyone else's. So actually, we're just gonna, no joke, we're just gonna stack up here. Even though this leaves freedom of movement for the rest of the Grasslanders to move up towards us. So let me jump back to what I was saying. I don't like how this game handles war in the abstract, and make no mistake, this obviously is an abstraction of war. That's what games are. Games are abstractions of, or they tend to be abstractions of experiences that occur in the real world. In this case, the thing that we are really dealing with, and see, if we just move up, the Karya clan troops will attack us, and we're just going to cut our way out and escape from this sort of ambush. So what I don't like, you're going to see very, very quickly when I move to attack the clan in our way. There's some discussion here about whether Chris should stay and fight alongside her troops or whether they should escape. And Salome has a plan, but they need to break out. Salome is a very smart sort of tactician, and we just need to move to that square. We need to escape to the east. So when I enter combat, I'm going to explain why I don't like what's going on, but also why there are certain strengths to what's going on. So when I move into attack here, it heads into the normal battle system, right? And Suikoden 2 doesn't do that. You're sort of on this larger overworld, not really overworld, but larger map image of what's going on. And I think that keeping the action to sort of the macro scale as opposed to zooming in on the micro scale like we get here in the battle system stresses certain things about war that I think are important to be, or should be stressed. And what I mean by that is that while zooming in on the micro level can give us these narratives about the battles that are occurring, you know, we can sit back and say, okay, so this is what is happening in the battle. By keeping it on the macro scale, what's going on instead is that war is sort of kept in the abstract. It's kept to a numbers game. And keeping it to a numbers game stresses how, first of all, excuse me, how large war actually is. And it also stresses the devastation of war. So here, losing a unit, I can zoom in and see the, you know, when I'm fighting, it's, okay, this is comprised of 4 units, even though that might represent, in the larger abstract, not just 3 units on the field, but more than that. But here it makes the battles feel smaller, whereas if you keep it to a sort of a larger RTS type deal, what happens is that the scale of what's happening is reinforced, so that when a unit is destroyed, like here, we're like, oh, it's like 3 characters that I was playing as were sort of killed. But if I deal with it in the context of a larger model that sort of makes like 1 unit represent potentially hundreds of troops, when I lose that unit, I'm losing, you know, in that abstract model, more people. And so the devastation of war is reinforced because of the scale that is implied through the system that represents the action of war. I hope that made sense. Basically what I'm saying is that when you get to moments like this, here I had 3 characters, I see the 3 characters dead on the field, or 2 of them, and the unit commander lost, and then I sort of lose that unit, but it doesn't really mean much compared to me having a unit that might represent hundreds or even thousands of soldiers. Here it just sort of like, you know, that unit with Chris, it's like Chris, Salome, and like another knight, right? But in Suikoden 2 or in other games that handle war, you know, RTS games, a unit itself can be comprised of multiple individual soldiers, as we understand it, but those soldiers are more than just like one person. We understand them as symbols pointing towards groups, whereas here we don't necessarily get that because the game zooms into that micro level where other games will keep it on that larger scale. And I think that larger scale helps reinforce the horror of war, if only because it implies a larger scale when it comes to death and the violence that's occurring. So Salome has a plan, and it is a plan born of desperation. And so when we see the attack on the Karya village in Ghetto's chapter, or in Hugo's chapter especially, we do not understand the context in which it is being carried out. But Salome is going to say, listen, we are going to raid this camp. Salome, his plan is just, we're going to attack it. And once they see that the village is attacked, they will back off and go to their village, and that will leave space for our troops to retreat. It's a pretty cold tactical decision born, like I said, of desperation, but at the same time, we understand that the context of what's occurring isn't that the game is trying to, the Zexan forces aren't trying to go in there and just mindlessly slaughter everyone. They are they are going in there for a tactical reason, for a strategic reason. Really, tactics are the things that happen in the moment-to-moment decision makings of battle. This is a strategy decision in order to take care of things on a larger scale. But, you know, if we're playing Hyuko's chapter, all we know is that we return and our home is on fire. Right? We don't understand what's happening. We don't understand the context of what's occurring. We don't know that there's all of this war going on. We just know, oh my gosh, my home is being attacked. And there's emotional impact to that. But here we get to understand the context of what's occurring. And we will cut this section short and continue on to see sort of what happens in the Karya attack in a more detailed version in the next segment. So thank you very much for watching. Leave a comment if you like this. Let me know if you really want to see more of this series. I like Suikoden a lot. We haven't had a proper Suikoden title since Suikoden 5, and that was like in 2006. So I really like showing people this series. I like people seeing more stuff from the 6th console generation. It's really useful, because these are titles and franchises that are sort of forgotten. Oh my gosh, I turned just a little bit and got into a battle. I will take care of this battle off screen. I will see you in the next segment. I love you very much. Thank you for watching. Bye!